And we continue at 2:06 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wang has the day off. He'll be back with us on Monday. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. We are continuing to receive your emails, your theories on what happened to Gene Hackman, his wife, and their dog. Listener Bob wrote us and suggested that he was maybe making a movie with Alec Baldwin. Now, that's a good theory, but I don't think he died from gunshot wounds. And that's what would have happened if he was shooting a movie with Alec Baldwin. But we'll have to wait for the autopsy to find out for sure. If you want to continue emailing your theories on what happened to Gene Hackman, I would love to read them at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Well, you can send it to the phone number. No one will get it, but you can email it to us and we'll receive it. johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. All right. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. She is a contributing editor to City Journal and with the Manhattan Institute, Heather MacDonald. Heather, welcome.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. So you and I have had many conversations about the Soros DAs and the Biden administration with their soft on crime judges and all of these backwards attitudes about criminal justice and essentially treating the victims like criminals and the criminals like victims. And it almost seems as if there was a course correction that took place this November pretty much across the board. From the federal presidential election where Kamala Harris, who is another soft on crime D, was not selected. Donald Trump was. And the types of judges that we're going to get at the federal level, it's going to be very different than what we've received over the last 4 years. You look at what's happened at the state and local level, where you had Proposition 36 here in California passed by wide margins. You had the Soros DAs in Alameda County and Los Angeles County thrown out on their keister by voters in some of the deepest blue parts of the country. Do you think the country collectively just said enough is enough and we're going back to the way things used to be?
Well, I think voters are saying that. Whether the prosecutors and the politicians are getting the message yet is difficult to say. I'm in New York currently, and we still are having repeat criminals, people who have assaulted people 20 times in the past, being let out by judges, prosecutors not seeking high enough bail. So the commitment on the left to the absolutely preposterous idea that racial disparities in the criminal justice system are the result of racism, not disparities in criminal offending, it's going to be hard to wean them off of that. But I am, strangely optimistic about many things now, John, since January 20th, and watching what's been happening in Washington. And I think that ordinarily federal government has little impact on local crime fighting. That's generally something that is at the local level. The federal government can't order district attorneys to prosecute. It can't order police chiefs to arrest for fare beating and assault and trespass. But I think that there has been a change of mentality, and Trump, frankly, does have some potential tools at his fingertips for coming down even harder and making sure that voters are listened to. During the campaign, his campaign materials proposed a very radical theory that nobody's tried before, which is to investigate these district attorneys like the outgoing Pamela Price or the outgoing George Gascon, who have put race at the center of their prosecution policies. Trump suggested investigating them for civil rights violations because justice is supposed to be colorblind. And it's an interesting legal theory to follow. It would be complicated, but it would be quite appropriate in California with its abysmal Racial Justice Act, which does the same in reverse. It says if you've been doing colorblind justice and you've had a disparate impact on blacks, criminals, that should be a civil rights violation. So we'll see what happens. I think it's also a good sign. I think Trump has the bully pulpit, and he clearly cares about graffiti. He cares about litter. He cares about looting. And he can simply shift the public discourse and put these left-wing prosecutors on the defensive for why they are putting the interests of criminals, as you say, John, ahead of the law-abiding, hard-working citizens of this country.
One of the things that they're doing with local DAs, local police agencies, local sheriffs, if they're not cooperating with ICE, is they're threatening to withhold federal dollars. So many of these police departments, while they are local entities and much of their funding does come from state and local sources, they do rely on things like federal grants for any number of things, the DUI checkpoints, the this, the that. A lot of that money comes from Washington. If you're Donald Trump, can you apply that same logic to these soft-on-crime DAs, these soft-on-crime cities, where if they're not going to enforce the laws in their jurisdiction or they're not going to enforce them to his standards and specifications, that we're going to withhold that federal money from you and we're going to punish you and hit you where it hurts?
That would be so great. In the immigration context, you would think it's self-evident. You know, we've got these huge buckets of money that go into local jurisdictions for the COPS grants that are for police hiring and burn grants. In the first Trump administration, he tried to do just what you're suggesting, John, which is to withhold that federal funding from sanctuary jurisdictions. And he was dragged into court and basically lost. Only one circuit court upheld the withholding of federal grants to sanctuary cities. The cases were before the Supreme Court right as the Trump administration ended, and then the Biden administration, of course, withdrew them because it was all in favor of sanctuary jurisdictions. So it's an unsettled question whether that can be done with regards to immigration non-compliance with the federal law, and so it would be even more unsettled whether that could be done generally for law enforcement. I think it's a very, very complicated area of the law. One of the issues might be, is there any indication in those congressional programs that the money can be withheld for non-enforcement? It may be that this is an area that Congress should really get its act together and just change the law. Then you wouldn't have to litigate this in court. If Congress got together and said, we are not going to fund you, and I don't think there should be federal funding of law enforcement to begin with. I think it's a complete shell game. It's a waste of federal tax dollars. There's this whole myth that if Los Angeles gets federal tax dollars, whoa, it's new money, it's free money. No, it's just LA taxpayers' dollars that was sent to Washington, creamed off the top by every bureaucrat along the way, and sent back in a much diminished form to those same local taxpayers who have been brainwashed into thinking they should be grateful to Washington for getting their own taxpayer dollars back. I would get rid of all federal grants. The only thing federal money should fund is uniquely federal responsibilities, treaty enforcement, interstate commerce. But if we're going to have it, it would be great to be leveraged, but we don't know if that's possible yet.
We're speaking with Heather MacDonald, who's the author of The Diversity Delusion, available online at Amazon.com. Heather, let's shift gears here for a second, because there's a local assemblyman here, Rick Chavez Burr, who has written legislation that would essentially criminalize defending yourself. it's modeled after Kyle Rittenhouse, where he believes that Kyle Rittenhouse is a criminal and should not have had the right to defend himself when people were trying to kill him during the BLM riots that were going on in Wisconsin. And he wants to make it so that you do not have the legal right to defend your property. If someone were to break into your house in the middle of the night, you wake up and you see someone standing in your living room that doesn't have permission to be there. If this law or this bill were to pass, you would not have the right to fire a gun, use lethal force if you feel threatened. He says that it is needed out of equity. What do you make of this whole movement from him and others to criminalize self-defense when you are the victim of a crime? Someone is breaking the law. Whether or not their intent is to kill you, I don't know, but if someone's in my house in the middle of the night, I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're just there to take my car. This is something that's not just one-off. It's not just one nut who's trying to create attention. Criminalizing self-defense is something that's been going on the left right now for quite some time. What do you make of that?
It's appalling, John, and this is also comparable to the Daniel Penny, Jordan Neely case in New York, where you had a good Samaritan who was trying to protect New York subway riders from a drug-addicted, psychotic vagrant who was threatening them, and he was prosecuted by Alvin Bragg for putting the guy in a hold, and he ended up dying. He was prosecuted for murder, which was absurd. Thank God the jury eventually acquitted Penny, but it's the exact same argument. And you mentioned equity, which is the key to every insane idea in criminal justice right now, which is it's all about race. Any neutral constitutional principle that has a disparate impact on black criminals is per se racist, per people like this legislator. The fact of the matter is, it is the height of gall for government to dare to criminalize law-abiding citizens who are doing what the government fails to do. The reason we create government, we cede our power of self-defense to them because they are supposed to uphold law and order. They are supposed to protect property. Without protection for property rights, you have no civilization. You are back to anarchy. When your house can be plundered, when stores can be plundered without consequence, you're basically living in the jungle. And for government to say, we're not going to protect you, but by the way, we're going to return to a state of nature. We're not going to protect property. But by the way, in your state of nature, you can't protect yourself. That is unbelievably hypocritical and unjustified. And citizens should not put up with it. It is completely, if government is not going to protect you, of course, there is an inherent right to protect yourself.
And let's be honest, whether that law passes or not, it's not going to impact the behavior of homeowners. If you wake up in the middle of the night and there's someone who breaks through your window standing in your living room and you have a gun and you think they're there to kill you, you're going to do what you need to do to protect yourself. What they want to do, and I think what this will result in, is if you happen to do that in a jurisdiction where you have one of these whack job DAs, we're going to fill up the prisons with the victims of crime, and to them, that's equity.
That's right. You change the racial demographics of prisons. It's all about sticking it to the white guy. Now, that's not to say, of course, that the vast majority of victims of violent street crime are themselves black. These insane, barbaric drive-by shootings that are going on by the dozens every day overwhelmingly have black victims as well as black perpetrators. That's why we don't talk about them. But for property crime, it may be a different story. I'm not so sure you're right. You may be absolutely right, John. I'm not sure that there will be no chilling effect on this. It is the case with the police. Studies have shown that they do second-guess themselves in a shoot-don't-shoot scenario when you're looking at something that may be a cell phone, it may be a can of Coke, or it may be a gun, and officers will hesitate milliseconds longer to make their shoot-don't-shoot decision if it's a black suspect And the irony is that police are much better at making those judgments about whether what they're seeing is a gun or something innocuous than civilians are. They're pretty damn accurate, but they do get the message. So I'm not sure. Somebody may respond, with instinct, or they may second guess themselves, in which case they're putting themselves at risk.
The city of Chicago was in a place very similar to where Los Angeles is now, where you had a machine Democratic politician. In their case, it was Lori Lightfoot. In our case, it's Karen Bass, who screwed up a lot. And because of that, we're on the ropes. And it was pretty clear that she was going to lose re-election, regardless of who it was that was running against her. In Chicago, unfortunately, instead of improving the city government, improving the quality of the mayor, they went backwards. And they elected a defund the police, left-wing nut job who got in there and did everything that a defund the police kind of candidate said that they were going to do. And now he's sitting at, I think, an approval rating that's in the single digits. What do you make of what's going on right now in Chicago, where even a liberal deep blue city has just abandoned that guy, and he is now a man without a country?
Well, it's about time. He was the one that pulled their contract for ShotSpotter technology, which tells the police where shootings are, because most of the shootings never get called in inner city communities. He pulled it, but then he said, wait a minute, you got to stick around for the Democratic National Convention. So we want safety for the delegates, but once that's out of town, then we got to get rid of this ShotSpotter technology, because again, it has a disparate impact on black criminals. He's been wreaking havoc on the city for a long time. I hope that his approval ratings stay low, and I hope voters don't forget when they vote again, because he was voted in by the south and west sides of Chicago, where the bulk of crime occurs. So, I hope that you get a turnaround like you did in Oakland, where you had the NAACP there initiating the recall campaign and wanting a state of emergency in Oakland because of Pamela Price. But race politics in this country they're getting better, but they're still pretty bad.
As I look at the poll here, Heather, the only thing more unpopular than the mayor of Chicago is the Kendrick Lamar halftime show.
Well, I'm glad I missed it then. I've missed both of them. But yeah, I mean, he's just been screwing up on all sorts of things. He's been screwing up on budgeting as well, and we'll see how he gets himself out of this.
The book is The Diversity Delusion, available online at Amazon.com. Heather MacDonald, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks, John.
Right now it's time for KABC Dependable Traffic. It's the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And with the end of the show quickly approaching, if you want to continue listening after I sign off at 3, that's easy to do. All you have to do is subscribe to the podcast edition of this program on your handy-dandy iPhone, and the episodes will load automatically to your phone, so it doesn't matter if you're on a cruise ship and we're too cheap to pay for the Wi-Fi, if you're on an airplane and too cheap to pay for the Wi-Fi, or at home and too cheap to pay for the Wi-Fi, you can listen to us anytime you want. Right now, it's time for headlines. It's the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC. I've got to say, I am completely obsessed with this Gene Hackman story. I can't stop reading about it. It started early in the morning, and it's just gone on all day, including during the news and commercial breaks. And I can't get over why, given the circumstances, the initial report said that there was no foul play suspected. And then I thought, well, that's in the eye of the beholder now, isn't it? Because different jurisdictions regard suspicious behavior or suspicious surroundings differently than others. For example, you look at how some of these shady foreign countries look at certain types of deaths. Take Russia, for example. Whenever there was someone who was on the wrong side of the government and they're found dead, they always say they died of natural causes. They pissed Putin off, and then suddenly natural causes just took over. What happened to Vladimir over there? Oh, he died of natural causes. What happened to him? Oh, his head fell off. He was getting pretty old. Natural causes. No need to investigate. No need to take a closer look at that. Just one day, he's a normal guy. The next day, his head falls off. He's not half the man he used to be. What are you going to do? You never know when the Lord is going to take you home. That's how they do it in Russia. Now, I'm not suggesting that New Mexico has the same policies as Russia, but let's face it, that's the sticks. Santa Fe, okay, that's a resort town. They got good restaurants. That's a state capital, so you have some state workers there. They have this great hotel there called 10,000 Waves, Japanese-inspired. It's a spa and a hotel all at the same place. I highly recommend. But Santa Fe is not some huge metropolis where you have a police department that's used to investigating crime. It's like Boulder, Colorado. You remember what those cops were like that investigated the John Benet Ramsey case? I don't know what kind of training they have in Boulder, Colorado. You watch a few episodes of CSI fill in the blank, and you have more training than they do. They screwed that up. So I don't know if it's just bad policing or what. So I was looking at the LA Times. I'm trying to find more information on the death of Gene Hackman, his wife, and his dog. Here is what the LA Times has to say. There were no signs of obvious blunt force trauma, carbon monoxide poisoning, or forced entry into the home. This according to a search warrant filed in the Santa Fe Magistrate Court. While one dog was found dead inside the home, there were two other dogs running around the property. And Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa's bodies showed signs that they had fallen down abruptly. So it wasn't like they were laying in bed and that's where they died at the same time. It looked like they had fallen down. They were standing and fell down. Their bodies were discovered in Santa Fe on Wednesday afternoon, which was yesterday, during a welfare check. A neighborhood security official was able to see the two lying unresponsive on the ground. Deputies with the sheriff's office discovered Hackman, 95, and Arakawa, 64. Boy, he was robbing the cradle. 95 and 64? Well, I guess he was wealthy and famous. He can find a younger woman. Their bodies were found in separate rooms of the house. Two maintenance workers reported the discovery, according to the search warrant. The front door to the two-story home was ajar when deputies arrived. Arakawa's body was found near a space heater in a bathroom beside the front door, with prescription pills scattered on a countertop nearby. A deputy suspected the space heater could have fallen if she abruptly fell to the floor. So there's pills all over the place in the bathroom. Now, that doesn't mean that she took a whole bunch of them. It could mean she was just holding them, and if she just dropped dead, you're going to spill them all over the place. The cause of death will be determined by the State Office of the Medical Investigator. An autopsy showed there were no external trauma to either Hackman or Arakawa. So no gunshots, they weren't stabbed, they weren't hit over the head. They both just dropped dead in the house in different rooms. According to the warrant, deputies found a dead German Shepherd in a bathroom closet about 10 to 15 feet from Arakawa. Her body was already decomposing and starting to bloat when she was discovered and showed mummification in both hands and feet. Hackman's body was found on the floor near the kitchen and appeared to have fallen suddenly, according to the warrant. The deputy found a walking cane and sunglasses near his body. Maybe he's like Jack Nicholson and wears sunglasses indoors. He also showed signs of death similar to Arakawa's. Santa Fe County Sheriff Aiden Mendoza told the Santa Fe New Mexican that it was unclear when the couple died. All I can say is we're in the middle of a preliminary death investigation, he told the paper. I want to assure the community and neighborhood that there is no immediate danger to anyone. So, it wasn't carbon monoxide, according to them. It wasn't blunt force. There was no brutal murder. I guess we have to wait to find out what kind of drugs were in the system. But that would be a bizarre habit to take up at 95 years of age now, wouldn't it? You live 95 years clean and sober, and then suddenly you decide to go on a drug bender at 95? No. You wake up one day, 95 years of age, turn to the missus and say, hey, what do you say we do some drugs with the dog today? That didn't happen. Who does drugs with their dog? What is it, the dog from Family Guy? What's the name, Brian? No, that didn't happen. If you're going to do a murder-suicide thing, or I guess you want to just end it all at once, the whole family, wouldn't you be in the same room so you could say goodbye? I mean, I haven't heard any stories about him suffering from any chronic illness. I know there are people who suffer from chronic illness who decide to take their own life. That was the whole Jack Kevorkian thing. There's no chance you're going to get better. There's no chance you're going to recover. Your quality of life is awful. And you decide, all right, it's time to check out of the hotel. It's 11 a.m. I'll have my Hilton breakfast, and then at checkout time, adios. But if that's the case, usually they say goodbye to their loved ones, and the loved ones are in the room when it happens. It's not like you're in the bathroom and I'm in the living room. Let's take some drugs and kill ourselves, but after we take the drugs, I'm going to go in the bathroom and make sure my makeup's looking good. I don't know if I buy that. But it's just strange. There's got to be some kind of explanation as to what happened. And maybe when they do the complete autopsy and they tell us what kind of drugs and how many drugs were in their system, we'll know. But I would assume if you're going to kill yourself and have your wife kill herself all at once, you'd maybe be holding hands as you go out of this world. You'd certainly be in the same room with them, so the last thing you see is your spouse. It's not like, all right, let's kill ourselves. You go in one room, I'll go in the other. See you on the other side. That doesn't make any sense. I can see from the email that many of you have all kinds of theories as to what happened to Gene Hackman and his wife. If you want to provide any of those on the air, give us a call at 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222. We'll work some more calls in coming up in just a few minutes, but right now it's time for KABC Dependable Traffic. It's the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC. 790 KABC welcomes Light Up the Blues, benefiting Autism Speaks, featuring Stephen Stills, Neil Young, Billy Idol, Chris Stills, and very special guests to be announced. All of this takes place at the Greek Theater on April the 26th. Tickets are on sale Friday, which is tomorrow, at Ticketmaster.com. However, if you're caller number 9 right now at 888-790-5222, that's 888-790-5222, you'll win a pair of tickets to the show. All of this furnished by our friends at Nederlander. Good luck dialing. If you're on hold and want to weigh in on just exactly what you think happened to Gene Hackman, his wife, and his dog, we'll get to your calls in moments at 800-222-5222. It's the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC. Let's go to Ignacio in Huntington Beach. Ignacio, hello.
Hey, John. Great show.
Thank you.
As always, yes. But what you said about him robbing the grave, I think it was the other way around. I think he was robbing the cradle. I think she was robbing the grave. Right? Anyway, that's my thought. Okay? And thanks for taking my call.
Thank you for the call. Now, I did receive one theory in an email from a listener who suggested that he may have died and she couldn't live without him. He was the love of her life, and she decided, okay, he's dead. I'm going to go take some pills. Now, I guess that's possible, and I don't know much about their relationship. I know the homeless guy called her the C word, and he got really angry and hit the homeless guy. But beyond that, I don't know anything about them as a couple. But if you're 64 and you're married to someone who is 30 years older than you, who's 95 years old, isn't the death of the 95-year-old something that you think about at some point? I mean, you certainly know it's a possibility. Most people don't make it to 95 years of age. And if you're 95 years of age, you're playing with the house's money. You've had a good long run. But you're not going to live forever. And if you're married to him, you know that he's not going to live forever. So it's not like if he were to just drop dead one day, it would be a great big surprise. If he lived to 105, that would be a surprise. But dropping dead at 95, that shouldn't be a surprise to the spouse. If you're 64 and your 95-year-old husband drops dead, you got a lot of options in your life, especially if he's a wealthy man. You own a home in Santa Fe. That's kind of a high-rent district. You have a lot of options. You have a lot of choices with what you can do with the rest of your life. You can be single, and you can travel the world with your friends, with your relatives, maybe your children, go on cruise ships, go to different countries, maybe buy a second home somewhere. That's a possibility. You also can go out and get married. You can find another 95-year-old. Hell, if you're rich at the age of 64, you can go find a 30-year-old, depending on what kind of coin you have in your pocket. You can go out and you can get remarried. You can do whatever you want. The world is your oyster. But to call it quits because somehow the Almighty has wronged you by taking your 95-year-old husband home, that just doesn't seem right to me. I don't see that happening. I know there are some couples that are just unbelievably devoted to one another and cannot think of living without the other person. But how many of those types of couples have 30 years in age differences? I would imagine not many. But who knows? To each their own. Every relationship is different. Every relationship involves its own individual, unique dynamics. And maybe that was the case between those two. But there is an ongoing investigation, and it's a strange, strange, strange death scene. And I'm sure there's an explanation that can explain all of this, but I haven't seen it so far. All right, that's going to do it for us today. I'll be back tomorrow at noon. Randy will be back with us on Monday. It's the John Phillips Show on Talk Radio 790 KABC.